billionaire strides into his flagship hotel, yet is met with polite dismissal. But that night, everything changes. A public scandal erupts, power shifts, and no one sees it coming. This is the story of Elijah Carter, the man who challenged an entire industry and emerged victorious. But real triumph isn't the end. It begins when you shake the foundations. The streets of Manhattan glitter beneath holiday lights, their reflections dancing across Fifth Avenue's upscale storefronts. Soft snowflakes drift down, framing the city in a cinematic, magical hush, if you have the time to pause and notice. Inside the Plaza Hotel, opulence intensifies tenfold. A colossal chandelier spills golden light over gleaming marble floors, where impeccably dressed guests flow through space with grace. Bellhops in crisp uniforms glide by, wheels of designer luggage marking polished steps. Every detail whispers exclusivity, a silent code deciding who is allowed in. Elijah Carter sweeps through the revolving doors, brushing off stray snowflakes. He's been here countless times before, yet every visit strikes a paradox. Intimacy and alienation. The Plaza isn't just any property. It's one of his crown investments. And yet, in a place he owns, he still senses the unspoken question. Do you really belong? Tightening his cufflinks, embossed with his initials, he traces the faded stitches, a quiet reminder of all he's built. From cramped Harlem apartments to boardrooms of power, he has beaten the odds. Yet here, he still feels that invisible gaze sizing him up. A waiter glides past without a glance. A couple at reception receives warmth and smiles. He is met with measured politeness, as though he's just a passerby. He breathes out, steadying himself. None of this matters tonight. His mission. Experience Celeste, the rooftop restaurant he bankrolled firsthand. No privileges, no name-dropping, just the pure experience of a guest. The lobby air is rich with fresh-cut lilies and mellow whiskey notes from the bar. Executives laugh in the lounge, glasses clinking in a polished confidence. Near the elevators, a young staffer frowns, as if weighing whether to offer help, then averts his eyes. Inside the gilded elevator, Elijah studies his reflection. He straightens his tie and steels himself for what's ahead. Atop the elevator, a cool breeze brushes his face on the terrace. The restaurant lies beyond, dimly lit, elegant, impersonal. At its threshold, servers glide by, expression pristine but distant. Behind the entrance podium stands the maitre d', silver hair combed tight, his eyes scanning the room. Elijah steps forward. The man doesn't recognize him. That's precisely the point. Moments later, Richard Hawthorne, a veteran in fine dining known for crafting elite atmospheres, approaches. His eyes lock on Elijah, weighing him. Under constriction of judgment, he runs his thoughts through a well-trained filter, tailored suit, polished shoes. Yet, something is missing. No old money insignias, no cufflinks flashing pedigree. Elijah states calmly, "I have a reservation." Richard frowns. He checks his tablet. "I'm sorry, sir. We have no reservation under that name. Celeste requires booking in advance." Elijah's voice holds its calm. "Yes, you do." Richard hesitates, searching again, then shakes his head. He gestures toward the bar below. "Perhaps you meant our lounge." Elijah remains steady. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Tension ripples through the room. Nearby guests quiet. Richard signals for help. He spots a familiar couple, regulars, and welcomes them with warm authority. Then, turning back, he says to Elijah, "We're at capacity tonight." Silence stretches. Finally, Elijah exhales. "Check again." Richard stiffens, senses the shift. The restaurant's hush deepens as staff watches. At that moment, Vanessa Lee enters. Her heels click on marble, navy dress. She exudes authority without effort. Her sharp eyes sweep the scene. She speaks, unbothered. Is there an issue? Richard tries to salvage it. We're just verifying. Vanessa cuts him off. Odd. It looked like you were turning him away. Her gaze flicks to Elijah. That true? Richard falters. She interrupts again. You seated a couple without checking theirs. The balance tips. Richard's advantage crumbles. Richard Hawthorne's face turned pale. It hit him all at once. The magnitude of the mistake he had just made. Catastrophic. Irreversible. He stood there frozen, mere feet from the man he had so casually dismissed only minutes earlier. But this time, Elijah Carter was no longer just a nameless guest. He was now standing beside the CEO of the entire Plaza Hotel, being addressed with a kind of deference that made it unmistakable. Richard had crossed the wrong man. His throat dried. Words, once effortless, were now nowhere to be found. Around him, the staff started piecing it together. Eyes widened. Expressions shifted from confusion to the dawning weight of realization. A young hostess near the podium looked as though she had stopped breathing altogether. The atmosphere inside Celeste thickened. It was the silence before a thunderstorm, the moment when energy builds, sharp and heavy, waiting to be released. Conversations halted, forks stilled above plates, all attention funneled toward the front of the restaurant where something seismic was unfolding. Stephen Grant, CEO of the Plaza, didn't raise his voice, but it cut through the air like glass. Would you care to explain what's happening here, Mr. Hawthorne? Richard tried to steady himself. He'd handled boardrooms, press, and egos with finesse, but under the CEO's gaze and the restaurant's judgmental hush, his practiced calm began to fracture. Richard entered into a slow power swallow, and the pressure built and calm began. Of course, Mr. Grant, he managed, forcing control into his voice. I was merely enforcing standard house policy. Celeste upholds a strict reservation system, and this gentleman, he nodded toward Elijah, still unwilling to use his name, was not listed in our system. Elijah let out a quiet breath, not a laugh. There was nothing funny about it. He tilted his head slightly, like a professor correcting a student. That's interesting, Elijah said, voice smooth as velvet but laced with iron, because I distinctly recall watching you seat a couple moments ago, without even checking their name. Richard's jaw tightened. That was different. Was it? Elijah's tone didn't rise. It didn't need to, because from where I was standing it looked a lot like selective enforcement. Ernest Lobster, I said. Richard opened his mouth again, searching for words that didn't exist. But he never got the chance. A young hostess, maybe too green or simply too honest, broke the silence. I didn't have a reservation, sir. Richard turned to her slowly. His expression controlled, but panic flickered behind his eyes. He'd been cornered, and worse, exposed. Stephen Grant's eyes narrowed. He looked to Elijah. Mr. Carter, can you walk me through exactly what happened? Elijah nodded once, voice calm. I walked in expecting to be treated like anyone else. I gave no name, no title. I was told my reservation didn't exist, one I personally made. I watched other guests get ushered in without hesitation, and when I refused to accept that treatment, I was nearly asked to leave. Silence fell again, but this time it carried weight. Richard could feel it. Judgment, not whispered, not veiled. It sat on his chest like stone. I can assure you that wasn't my intention, he began, but his voice had lost its usual edge. Vanessa stepped forward then, wordless. She opened her purse, pulled out her phone, and pressed play. If he doesn't leave soon, call security. The room inhaled. Gasps rose. Heads turned. A wave of murmured shock spread like a shock wave. "That's," Richard stammered. "That's out of context." Vanessa's voice sliced through his protest. "You sure about that?" She slid her phone away. "Because it sounded pretty clear to me." Stephen's expression shifted, his voice now colder than marble. "You just refused service to the single largest investor in this hotel." The words hit Richard like a punch to the ribs. A ripple of disbelief spread through the room, guests exchanging looks, pulling out phones, ready to document the unraveling of a man in real time. Richard's world spun. He turned to Elijah again, finally fully seeing him. It clicked. Elijah Carter, the man behind some of the most profitable hotel acquisitions in the country, the investor whose silent moves shaped half of Manhattan's skyline. His legs felt weak. "Mr. Carter," he tried. But Elijah raised a hand. "No." His voice was calm, but it carried finality. "I don't need an apology," he said. "I need to ask you something." Richard swallowed. "Now that you know who I am," Elijah continued, his presence now towering, "do you believe I should be allowed to dine here?" Richard froze, and in that half-second of hesitation, he answered the question without speaking. It was too late. The truth had already been revealed. "Yes. Yes, Mr. Carter." Elijah nodded. "Then let me be clear. I don't want a simple termination. I want change. This isn't just about one man. This is about culture. If it happened to me, it's happened to others. It ends tonight." Stephen nodded solemnly. "Understood." "Stefan." Richard stood there, unraveling. It wasn't just a job he was losing. It was everything. His reputation, his control, his self-ethic. It was rainy. The silence was different now. Thick, charged. Guests stared. Staff stood rigid. No one spoke for him. Not one. Stephen turned. "You're dismissed, Richard. Effective immediately." Richard's jaw fell open. "Mr. Grant, I built this restaurant. You can't be serious." Stephen's tone was glacial. "I'm very serious. Turn in your credentials." The finality was suffocating. He looked around one last time, searching for any flicker of sympathy. There was none. He turned to Elijah, desperate. "This is absurd," he hissed. "Over one misunderstanding." Elijah repeated, stepping closer. "No, Richard, this is about a pattern. I know what you've done. I know the people you've made feel unwelcome. I know the ones who never came back." Then, something Richard hadn't expected, a quiet voice from the side. "It's true." A young server, barely 25, hands trembling. "I've seen it," she said, "more than once." Then another voice. "So have I." And another. Stephen gave a nod towards security. Two officers moved forward. "You can't do this," Richard snapped. One of them extended a hand. "Your badge." For the first time, Richard truly realized it was over. With trembling fingers, he reached into his coat and removed the badge he'd worn for 10 years. He placed it on the podium. In that gesture, everything he'd built crumbled. Security stepped in. As he was escorted toward the door, he turned one last time. Guests who once greeted him now looked on with cold indifference. Servers he had barked orders at stood quietly, some with relief on their faces. Elijah stood still. He wasn't smiling. He didn't need to. His presence alone said everything. What hurt the most wasn't the humiliation. It wasn't even the dismissal or the fact that he'd lost everything in the span of minutes. It was the silence Elijah kept. The lack of gloating, the absence of any cruel satisfaction. Elijah simply watched as Richard turned and walked away, and somehow, that was the final twist of the knife. Richard's jaw clenched. He turned on his heel, each step toward the exit as stiff as his pride. His back remained straight, as if sheer posture alone could hold together the pieces of his fractured dignity. As the doors opened, the icy Manhattan wind met him like judgment, but before he could vanish into the night, the final blow struck. It came not from the guests, but from the staff. A slow, scattered ripple of applause echoed across the floor of Celeste. The people who had once feared him now clapped, quietly, cautiously, but undeniably. It wasn't theatrical. It was cathartic. It was closure. Richard hesitated for only a second. Then he shoved through the doors, the sound of their applause still roaring in his ears. Inside, the applause faded, but the energy in the restaurant had shifted. Vanessa turned to Elijah, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. She didn't have to say anything. She didn't need to. Elijah rolled his shoulders back and exhaled. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. It started as a single video, posted quietly by a guest seated near the entrance. They had recorded everything, the tension, the denial, the revelation, and most damning of all, the moment the CEO addressed Elijah Carter, not as a stranger, but as the owner of the very hotel that had denied him entry. It spread first on Twitter, then TikTok, then Instagram. By midnight, it had millions of views. The caption read, "Imagine being this bold in your discrimination, and then realizing you just kicked out the boss." The internet didn't wait for context. The comment sections ignited. Outrage, solidarity, shock. People shared their own stories, times they'd been dismissed, judged, underestimated. The hashtags trended by sunrise. Boycott Celeste. Justice for racism in luxury. The media didn't lag far behind. Good Morning America dissected the clip before breakfast. CNN held a panel. The New York Times published an editorial dissecting racism in elite hospitality. Forbes released a feature titled, "When the CEO Goes Unrecognized: The Plaza Hotel Scandal and the Cost of Bias." It wasn't just noise. It was momentum. The Plaza's review pages were bombarded. Yelp, TripAdvisor, one-star ratings flooded in. Some reviews came from people who had experienced similar treatment. Others from people who simply saw the video and felt furious on principle. And the digging began. Former employees came forward. Anonymous voices that suddenly had platforms. They spoke of microaggressions, unfair firings, and a toxic atmosphere that had quietly festered under Richard Hawthorne's rule. Then came the petition. It started modestly, a few hundred names calling for accountability, for change. But by noon, it had surpassed 100,000. As the sign in Halo 3, this wasn't a scandal anymore. It was a reckoning. Inside the executive conference room of the Plaza, the tension was thick enough to chew. Mahogany paneling and floor-to-ceiling windows framed a city now watching their every move. The polished boardroom table gleamed, but no one was admiring the shine. Stephen Grant sat near the head of the table, stone-faced. Elijah Carter sat beside him, fingers laced, expression unreadable. Vanessa sat on his other side, pen in hand, already prepared to go to war. Across from them, the board members were in disarray. Some muttered, scrolling through headlines. "This is out of control," one murmured. "We're getting destroyed online." "Investors are calling," another added, voice strained. "We need a response now." But Grant didn't flinch. He knew better than to throw water on a wildfire. Platitudes wouldn't save them. "This isn't about optics anymore," he said at last, his voice cutting through the panic. "This is about who we are and what we allow." The room fell into heavy silence. Elijah leaned forward. "You're right," he said calmly. And how we respond will decide whether the Plaza sets a precedent or becomes a cautionary tale. Vanessa nodded. This was never about one man, she added, gaze unwavering. It's about the culture that allowed him to thrive. Some board members shifted uncomfortably. For years they had lived untouched by digital backlash. Untouchable. But not anymore. We don't need to fire a manager, Elijah continued, voice steady but firm. We need to rebuild the framework, because if this can happen to me with my name, my position, what do you think happens to guests who have neither? A pause. And let's be honest, Vanessa said. You didn't just fail me, or Elijah. You failed everyone who walked through those doors and didn't look the part. The older board members sat in stunned silence, some defensive, some reflective. One finally cleared his throat. We recommend issuing an apology. We emphasize that Celeste maintains its prestige, that this was a one-off, Vanessa cut in. Don't say it. But this is business, another offered. We can't alienate our core clientele. Elijah tilted his head, tapping a finger against the table. And what exactly is your core clientele? The ones who value exclusion more than service? There was no answer. He leaned in. I'm not here to burn this place down, he said. I'm here to make it better. But that only works if we stop pretending. Otherwise, all we're doing is polishing the silverware while the building rots from the inside out. The boardroom was silent. Stephen Grant met Elijah's gaze, then nodded. Then we start there. Vanessa allowed herself a quiet smile. This wasn't just reform. It was a revolution. The clientele that frequents Celeste expects tradition, refinement, the board member stated with quiet resolve. They're not the kind of people who want to see this establishment turned into some social experiment. Elijah's gaze sharpened. You mean they don't want to see change? The man hesitated, visibly aware of the weight of each word. They expect consistency. Vanessa scoffed, the disdain obvious in her tone. Consistency in exclusion? A few of the board members exchanged glances, the air in the room tightening. Elijah leaned back, absorbing the moment. His demeanor calm, but his presence growing heavier. Let me ask you something, he said, tone deceptively casual but edged in steel. Who do you think actually spends money here? The pause was brief, but Arthur Winslow couldn't help himself. Well, historically... Don't give me historically, Elijah cut in, palm rising. Give me now. Vanessa reached into her briefcase and slid a thick folder across the table. Since you're unsure, here's the data. She flipped it open with practiced ease. Black consumers contribute over $1.4 trillion, 0 cents to the U.S. economy annually. A significant portion goes directly into hospitality and luxury sectors. Yet, they are also the demographic most likely to receive subpar service in those same establishments. She let the words settle like cold water. Why? Because of the exact mindset you're defending right now. The silence was more than uncomfortable now. It was damning. Winslow bristled, crossing his arms. We're not denying inequality exists. We're saying the Plaza is a business, and businesses run on profit, not morality. Then explain to me how alienating an entire demographic is profitable. Elijah snapped back. Silence. Outside those walls, the storm continued to swell. Protesters lined the steps of the hotel now, signs raised high, accountability, not apologies, justice for the silenced. Others live-streamed the scene, watched by thousands. And beyond them, the counterpunch. Some loyal patrons to Celeste were publicly voicing outrage, not at Richard's actions, but at his removal. One particularly influential investor had already posted that Elijah was weaponizing identity politics to poison excellence. Elijah knew this game, knew it intimately. It wasn't just opposition, it was the system itself pushing back. Inside the boardroom, the murmurs began. Hesitations, calculations, fear. Then someone said what many were thinking. "Are you sure you want to do this?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Elijah inhaled deeply. He had built his empire on strategy. He'd won by choosing his moments with surgical precision. But this wasn't about winning. It was about meaning. "We don't fix this with a press release," he said. "We fix this by dismantling the walls that made it possible in the first place." The statement was clear, uncompromising, and it was the tipping point. He folded his hands on the table, expression unreadable. Then, calm as a stone in still water, he said, "If the Plaza won't commit to change, real, measurable change, I'll sell my shares immediately." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Gasps didn't follow, but an undeniable shift did. This wasn't just a power move. Elijah Carter was the hotel's largest private investor. Losing him wouldn't just be symbolic. It would destabilize the entire brand. Stephen Grant sat beside him, shoulders tight. He didn't speak, but his silence confirmed the weight of the moment. Across the table, Winslow tried one last time. "Let's not be hasty." "There's nothing hasty about this," Elijah said, voice unwavering. "You're trying to strong-arm us." "Giving you a choice?" Elijah cut in again. "Either evolve or become obsolete." Another board member leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "The Plaza has stood for over a century. It will survive with or without you." Elijah let a small, knowing smile crack his calm. "Maybe," he said, "but the public isn't waiting to see if I leave. They're watching to see what you do." Vanessa cleared her throat and pulled another folder from her bag. "This is a report compiled over the last 48 hours, she said, laying it flat. "It includes employee testimonies, internal complaints, guest reviews that never made it to official records. In the past 5 years, Celeste has been accused of discriminatory behavior against at least 12 black guests. These are only the ones we can confirm." She turned a page with sharp precision. "And you also find statements from staff, past and present, describing an entrenched culture of exclusion. Not explicit, never written, but undeniably enforced. No one could speak. No one dared." Vanessa's tone didn't waver. "So the question now isn't whether we respond. The question is, do we lead, or do we pretend nothing happened until the backlash buries us?" This time, no one tried to argue. Stephen finally exhaled. "Then let's make it official." He turned to Elijah. "What exactly do you propose?" Elijah didn't hesitate. "3 things, he said, holding up 3 fingers. "First, mandatory anti-discrimination training for every employee, executives included. Second, a full overhaul of service policies. That means no more unwritten rules about who gets greeted first, who gets the best tables, who gets to belong. And third, transparency. Real transparency. Audits on hiring, promotions, diversity at every level." Winslow scoffed, as expected. "This is absurd. Next you'll be asking for quotas." Elijah turned to him, gaze cool and deliberate. "It's not special treatment," he said. "It's equal treatment. And if that feels like a threat to you, maybe ask yourself why." Silence. The room stayed locked in tension for 30 more minutes. Arguments surfaced, resistance flared, but none of it changed the truth. The vote passed, barely. Stephen leaned back. "It's done." But Elijah didn't relax, because across the table sat Victor Langley, silent, smiling slightly, watching. He hadn't said a word all meeting, but Elijah recognized the look. It was the look of a man who had just lost 1 round, and was already plotting the next. Vanessa leaned toward Elijah, her voice barely above a whisper. He's not done. Elijah gave a single nod. Neither are we. Cable networks across the country began framing the story not as reform, but as division. Was Elijah Carter a visionary or a disruptor? The media danced on the line between curiosity and accusation. Pundits debated whether he was lifting the industry or breaking it apart. There were no direct attacks, just 1,000 veiled criticisms that cut deeper with every repetition. And Victor Langley? He knew that was all it would take. Elijah sat at his office desk scrolling through the headlines on his phone, jaw clenched. Vanessa stood beside him, arms crossed tightly, eyes locked on her tablet. "How fast did this spread?" Elijah asked, his voice even but cold. "Too fast," she replied, tapping through article after article. "Look, 5 major outlets, identical framing, all within 24 hours. This isn't a coincidence, this is a campaign." Elijah's fingers curled slightly on the phone. "They're trying to turn me into the villain." Vanessa nodded. "If they convince the public that you're the problem, not the system you're trying to change, then the fight's already over." Elijah looked up, the fire in his eyes rising behind calm restraint. "This isn't about the Plaza anymore. This is about power." Vanessa's lips curled into a grim smile. "Good. That means we're scaring them." Elijah gave a small nod. But he wasn't celebrating. He understood the terrain too well. This wasn't just PR. This was war. And Victor had just drawn first blood. The next morning, the real blow landed. A sleek, suspiciously well-produced exposé appeared on the front page of the Manhattan Ledger, a respected financial journal known for influence among Wall Street circles. The headline hit like a slap. Elijah Carter, a hotelier with a history of questionable deals. The article didn't accuse him of anything directly. It didn't have to. It dredged up a decade-old real estate transaction, reworded it, twisted facts, and rebranded a legal common business deal as shady. It was a political hit job in the language of professionalism. Phrases like "questions remain" and "some analysts speculate" were used to cast shadows without offering evidence. Within hours, financial news channels ran with it. Elijah's phone exploded. Reporters, partners, investors. Some voiced support, others said nothing, and a few, they distanced themselves. "This is Victor," Vanessa said, pacing the room. "No way this timing is accidental." Elijah nodded. He had seen this play before. Whisper campaigns, manufactured outrage, plant just enough doubt, and soon people begin rewriting their own beliefs. By lunchtime, Elijah's rivals in the hospitality industry were taking advantage of the noise. Interviews on morning shows. "Transparency is everything," one CEO said with a smug grin. "You can't build a lasting empire on shaky ground." They never said his name. They didn't have to. By noon, the Plaza boardroom was in full-blown crisis mode. Stephen Grant sat at the head, tight-lipped, while some board members demanded damage control. "We can't ignore this," one barked. "The longer we wait, the more it looks like guilt." "Guilt?" Vanessa snapped. "For what? A baseless story without one shred of proof?" Arthur Winslow leaned in, calm but sharp. "You don't need proof to damage trust. Just suspicion." He looked directly at Elijah. "If we're not careful, this hotel's reputation and our investments will take a massive hit." Elijah held Winslow's gaze. "And what's your solution?" Winslow didn't blink. "Step back." The great utter hush fell over the room. Elijah let out a short, humorless laugh. "You want me to disappear?" "Temporarily," Winslow said smoothly. "Until this dies down. Take the pressure off the board, off the Plaza, and hand the narrative back to Victor?" Vanessa said, incredulous. Who does that benefit? All of us, Winslow replied. Elijah turned to Stephen. And you? Stephen hesitated. I believe in your leadership, but this pressure won't stop unless we have a strategy. There it was, the true test. Would he bend? Would he disappear to protect people who had never protected him? He stood slowly, chair creaking behind him. You're all afraid of reputational damage, Elijah said, voice low but steady. But I didn't get here by backing down every time someone tried to tear me down, and I sure as hell won't start now. Then he turned to Vanessa. We dig, we find out how deep Victor's fingerprints go, and then we burn everything he's built. That night, the real fight began. They pored over old financial records, interviews, shell companies, tax shelters, and then Vanessa found it. A string of offshore trusts, undisclosed transfers, properties flipped through shadow entities. Not illegal, but dirty enough to destroy his name. This is it, she whispered, eyes wide. This is how we end him. Elijah nodded slowly. This isn't just about protecting my name anymore. This is about ending a cycle. People like him never get exposed, not this time. They went on offense. First stop, the New York Times. Seated in a private studio, Elijah sat across from one of the Times' senior journalists, calm, composed, his voice steady, rehearsed but real. The timing of these allegations, he said. It's not an accident. This didn't come out 5 years ago or 10. It came out now, the moment I challenged the system. Backed with receipts, he dismantled the accusations piece by piece. Across the country, Vanessa appeared on CNN, brandishing internal memos leaked from Victor's own PR firm, proof of a coordinated smear campaign. This was planned, she said, her voice cutting, and the real question we should be asking is, what is Victor Langley so afraid of? Social media caught fire. Justice for Elijah. Expose Langley. Luxury has no color. Celebrities, entrepreneurs, activists came forward, stories poured in. Guests, former employees, and insiders all speaking out against long-standing exclusion in luxury hospitality. Then, Forbes dropped the bombshell. A deep dive into Victor's real estate portfolio. Shady transactions, allegations of bribery, shell companies, financial manipulation. Hours later, the Department of Justice issued an official investigation into Victor Langley's empire. At the Plaza boardroom, the once invincible man sat silent, cold fury in his eyes. We need to address Victor's role, Stephen Grant announced. Victor scoffed. So now I'm the villain. You've become a liability, Elijah said quietly. Your name alone is costing us investors, trust, and the future. Victor's voice dropped to a growl. You turned this hotel into a political circus. Elijah didn't blink. No. I turned it into a place that stands for something. Vanessa slid the DOJ subpoena across the table. Victor's hands trembled slightly as he read it. Within the hour, every connection between Victor Langley and the Plaza was severed. The headlines were immediate. FBI opens investigation into hotel tycoon Victor Langley. Plaza Hotel cuts ties with embattled stakeholder. Victor Langley had lost. But Elijah Carter? He had just begun. Victor Langley sneered across the table, his words dripping with bitterness. So this is about fairness now? Or is it just about you? Because from where I'm sitting, all I see is a man playing the race card, using guilt to force this board into submission. A hush fell over the room. No one moved. No one breathed. But Elijah didn't flinch. He let the silence do its work, let Victor's words hang in the air like smoke. He scanned the board members, noting the subtle shifts. Arthur Winslow stiffened but said nothing. A few looked away, their shame visible. Some were visibly disgusted, some quietly complicit. Then Elijah spoke, his voice calm, steady, precise. "I'm not asking for privilege, Victor. I'm asking for progress, and you can call it whatever makes you feel safer, but the truth? The only one afraid of change in this room is you." Victor's smirk wavered. "You built this empire thinking it would always belong to people like you. But times change, and today, this board decides whether the Plaza changes with them or gets left behind." Silence again, but this time it cracked differently. Stephen Grant cleared his throat. "It's time to vote." One by one, names were spoken. Elijah, Elijah, a fourth, a fifth. Ben. Arthur Winslow paused. He glanced at Victor, then sighed quietly. Victor, but the conviction in his voice was gone. By the end, the tally was clear. 8 votes for Elijah, 3 for Victor. 1 abstained. Stephen looked up, his voice firm. "The board has spoken. Effective immediately, Victor Langley is removed from his position and will relinquish all holdings in the Plaza." Victor went red, knuckles white, as he gripped the edge of the table. "You can't do this," he growled. "I built this place." Elijah stood slowly, adjusting his jacket. "No, Victor, you held it hostage." Security stepped forward. Victor opened his mouth, but there was nothing left to say. "This isn't over," he muttered as he was led away. But Elijah didn't respond, because it already was. And so the real transformation began. Within days, sweeping reforms were put into motion. A complete overhaul of the Plaza's service policies. A career development program for underrepresented talent. Partnerships with organizations advocating workplace equity. Some of the old money elite revolted. Conservative outlets mocked the changes as the death of luxury. A few wealthy patrons canceled bookings in protest. But the numbers told a different story. Bookings soared. A new wave of progressive clientele arrived. Tech CEOs, artists, investors, changemakers, people who valued not just luxury, but meaning. The Plaza, once a monument to exclusion, had become a symbol of rebirth. At night, Elijah stood atop the rooftop, the city shimmering beneath him. Vanessa joined him, a glass of champagne in hand. "You did it," she said quietly. He smiled. "No, we did." She tilted her head. "So, what's next?" He looked down at Manhattan's glowing arteries pulsing with possibility. "We rebuild, but this time, we do it right." Victor Langley, meanwhile, was watching his empire crumble. The morning after his removal, headlines exploded. Langley under federal investigation. From power to prison, the downfall of a hotel king. Langley's luxury empire implodes amidst scandal. The FBI launched an official probe into years of financial misconduct, tax evasion, shell companies, bribes, politicians who once returned his calls, silent, investors, gone. Within a week, Victor was forced to resign from the board of his own global hotel brand. The man who once dictated who was worthy was now a ghost in the headlines, the punchline of late-night monologues and memes. But even then, Victor couldn't let go. In the dark corner of a midtown bar, Elijah found him, alone, tie undone, whiskey in hand. "You got what you wanted," Victor muttered. "You tore me down. Congratulations." Elijah studied him. The man who had once tried to destroy him now looked small, defeated. "I didn't tear you down," Elijah said softly. "You did that yourself." Victor scoffed. "This world won't change, Carter. You just painted a target on your back. They'll come for you next." "Maybe," Elijah admitted. but I won't go down protecting a system that should have never existed in the first place. Victor's bitterness twisted into something else. Maybe guilt. Maybe regret. You think you're different, he asked. You think you'll escape the system. Bill leaned forward. No. I think I'll change it. He stood, adjusted his coat, and looked Victor in the eye one last time. It's over, Victor. For you. And as he stepped into the night, the cold air wrapped around him, not like a threat, but like freedom. Victor Langley had become a relic of the past, and the industry felt the aftershock. High-exam hotels across the country began re-examining their practices. Policies changed. Executives resigned. Whispers became actions. For the first time in decades, luxury was being redefined, not as exclusion, but as elevation. Elijah stood at the center of it all, not as a man who sought revenge, but as the one who sparked a revolution. At the Global Business Equity Summit, Elijah took the stage. No rehearsed speech, just truth. Power isn't about money, he told the crowd. It's about creating change that outlives you. He paused. This system only wins when we accept its rules. So we do. The room erupted in applause. That night, back at the Plaza, Vanessa joined him on the balcony. You're not slowing down, are you? She asked. Elijah smiled at the city below. We just laid the foundation, now we build something bigger. And far beneath them the plaza shimmered, not just with light, but with legacy. For the first time in its storied history, it didn't belong to the past. It belonged to everyone.